One arrogant rider, one calm driver, and a secret no one saw coming. By the time they reached their stop, tears replaced hatred. The afternoon sun perched high above the suburban street, pouring down in sheets of warmth that made the pavement shimmer like glass. Shadows of trimmed hedges stretched lazily across manicured lawns, and cicadas buzzed somewhere in the distance, a chorus that marked the heart of summer in this quiet, well-off neighborhood. At the end of Maplewood Drive, a modest sedan slowed to a smooth stop in front of an elegant brick house, with white pillars and perfectly polished windows. The car itself wasn't flashy, just clean, reliable, and well-kept, its deep navy paint freshly washed so that it caught tiny glints of sunlight. Each time the leaves above shifted in the breeze, inside the car, Marcus tapped his finger lightly against the steering wheel, letting out a measured breath before glancing down at his phone. The screen glowed with the name of his next passenger, Mr. Donaldson. Marcus's eyes flickered to the large house beyond the windshield. He could see, through the open doorway, a glimpse of polished oak floors and a decorative staircase. Everything in its place, no stray leaves on the porch, no stray mail in the box. It was the sort of place that gave off a silent warning. Everything here is neat, orderly, and guarded by unspoken rules. Marcus adjusted the collar of his crisp white shirt, brushing away an invisible speck of dust from his charcoal blazer. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, his beard neatly trimmed, his tie properly aligned, and allowed himself a small nod. Appearance, he learned long ago, was armor. In neighborhoods like this, it often had to be. He turned off the engine and stepped out. As soon as he closed the car door behind him, the subtle click of the latch seemed louder than it should have been in the stillness of the street. He moved with unhurried confidence, his shoes crunching softly on the gravel path that cut through a patch of lush green lawn. Toward the front porch, Marcus reached the car's back door first, unlocking it and pulling it open with an easy, practiced motion. He stood there, posture straight, one hand resting lightly on the door handle as he looked toward the house, ready to greet his passenger with a warm, polite smile that had become second nature to him. Inside the doorway, a figure appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, with the stiff bearing of someone who had grown accustomed to being obeyed. Mr. Donaldson stepped into the sunlight with the cautious precision of a man who didn't like surprises and liked inconveniences even less. He wore a pale gray suit that looked freshly pressed, the white of his shirt so crisp it seemed to glow against the darker fabric. A thin gold watch peeked out from under his sleeve as he adjusted the cuff with an impatient flick of his wrist. The moment Donaldson's eyes fell on Marcus, his face shifted like a curtain being pulled back to reveal the true weather inside. What might have been a polite nod twisted instead into a tight, sour frown. His eyes narrowed, scanning Marcus from head to toe, lingering on the dark skin beneath that careful suit. The neat hands resting lightly on the car door. Marcus held the man's gaze calmly, neither shrinking nor overextending his politeness. He'd seen this look before, seen it in doorways, in boardrooms, at school drop-offs, and county offices. The trick was never to flinch, never to give the look what it wanted. He simply dipped his chin in a small, respectful greeting. "Good afternoon, sir," Marcus said, his voice smooth as river stones. "I'm Marcus. I'll be your driver today. May I take your bag?" Donaldson didn't move at first. He stood on his own porch as if the mere sight of Marcus had frozen him to the spot. His eyes flicked to the car, spotless, the leather seats in the back gleaming in the sun, then back to Marcus, as though trying to make sense of a puzzle he didn't particularly want to solve. Slowly, Donaldson stepped forward, shoes clicking sharply against the stone steps. He didn't hand over his briefcase. Instead, he clutched it tighter, knuckles whitening around the handle. The breeze caught the corner of his suit jacket, fluttering it just enough to expose the small monogram stitched into his shirt pocket, tiny letters that quietly declared his status to anyone close enough to notice. When he reached the car, Donaldson's nose twitched as if he'd caught an unpleasant scent. His mouth twisted, the beginnings of a scowl carving faint lines into his clean-shaven cheeks. "You're the driver?" he asked, each word laid down with a deliberate, almost amused disdain. He looked past Marcus at the car's interior, then back again, eyes cold and unblinking. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied evenly. "I'll get you where you need to go, comfortably and on time." For a second, a bird called somewhere in the trees overhead, a bright trill that seemed at odds with the tension gathering between the two men at the curb. Donaldson's frown deepened. His eyes darted down to the open car door and invitation he clearly didn't want to accept. Marcus stayed where he was, The polite smile still there, but his eyes watchful, waiting. He could almost hear his mother's voice in the back of his mind. Stand tall, baby. Let them carry their own hate. Yours is not to carry. So he did. He stood tall. He waited. Donaldson shifted his weight from one foot to the other, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple despite the mild breeze. Somewhere behind them, a neighbor's sprinkler sputtered to life. The rhythmic tick-tick-tick and hush of water, the only sound that dared to interrupt the heavy silence. At last, Donaldson let out a low, frustrated huff, one that seemed to say more than any insult ever could. He adjusted his grip on the briefcase, his eyes still locked on Marcus with a flicker of something raw and unwelcome. And so, under the bright, unblinking sun of a perfect suburban day, two men stood at the edge of a small moment that neither would soon forget, one holding the door open, the other deciding if he could stand to step through it. The cicadas droned on, the sprinklers whispered, and the street waited still and watchful for what would come next. Donaldson's eyes stayed fixed on Marcus like he was an unexpected stain on an otherwise spotless world. His lip curled into something between a sneer and a smirk, as if the heat of the afternoon weren't already scorching enough. Is this a joke? Donaldson's voice sliced through the humid air, sharp, incredulous, and just loud enough for the neighbors behind closed blinds to hear if they cared to listen. He let out a short, humorless laugh that died as soon as it escaped his throat. They sent you. He didn't wait for an answer. With an impatient flick of his wrist, he snapped his fingers once twice toward Marcus as though summoning a waiter at a country club dinner. Then he turned his attention to the sleek phone he pulled from his suit pocket. The bright screen lit up his face, highlighting the frown lines carved deep into his forehead. Marcus stayed where he was, his hand still resting gently on the open car door. He didn't flinch at the snapping fingers. He didn't sigh or roll his eyes. Instead, he watched Donaldson scroll furiously, thumbs jabbing the glass screen with a force that betrayed his brittle composure. Yes, I'd like to report a driver. Donaldson barked into the phone, voice rising and falling in waves of barely contained disgust. This is unacceptable. This is not what I ordered. I requested premium service, not... He stopped himself short, eyes darting to Marcus, then away, as if Marcus were a mirror reflecting something ugly back at him. Marcus took a measured breath, the warmth of the sun heavy on his shoulders. He let his eyes drift to the rows of identical houses lining the street-perfect lawns, painted fences, curtains fluttering behind double-glazed windows. Somewhere a lawnmower hummed, slicing through the tense air like a dull blade. Sir, Marcus began, his tone so calm it nearly disguised the steel beneath it. I can assure you I know this area very well. I've driven here for years. You'll be at your destination safely, and... Donaldson waved him off mid-sentence, with a flick of his hand, a gesture so dismissive it felt like a slap in the humid breeze. Save it, he spat out, eyes never leaving the screen. I don't want your assurance. I want another car, a proper car. He said the word proper like it was a brand name, like it was something Marcus could never be, no matter how polished his shoes or how fresh the scent of the car's leather interior. Under his breath, barely audible over the rhythmic click of his watch as he adjusted the band, Donaldson muttered something Marcus caught anyway, a single, ugly word that Marcus had learned to recognize by tone alone, even when people thought they buried it under the guise of subtlety. The momentary flicker in Marcus's eyes was the only betrayal of the sting. He forced it down, years of practice, of telling himself that hate hurled in secret was never about him, but about the cowardice of the person hurling it. He straightened his back just slightly, a small act of defiance that Donaldson didn't notice, too busy tapping and scrolling in search of a replacement driver. Donaldson peered at the rideshare map. Tiny car icons floated across the digital grid, moving dots that promised salvation, only they were all too far. He stabbed at the screen again, swiping and refreshing, each motion more frantic than the last. The longer he stood there, the clearer it became. No other cars were closer than Marcus's. The quiet street, once a mark of status, now seemed like a gilded cage. A bead of sweat traced a slow line down Donaldson's temple, catching on the edge of his collar before disappearing into the fabric. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable not from the heat alone, but from the reality slowly pressing in on him, that he had no real choice but to sit in the back of this car, with this driver, with this truth that he'd spent decades pretending didn't exist. Marcus watched him, standing with the quiet dignity of a man who knew when to let silence speak louder than argument. His hand never left the door, as if to remind Donaldson that the choice to step inside was still there, open, unwavering, and mercifully patient. Donaldson's voice was lower now, more desperate as he spoke to the customer service agent on the other end. "I'm telling you, can't you just send someone else? I don't care who. Just not." He glanced at Marcus again, cutting the sentence short. Even he seemed to sense that saying the rest out loud might hang in the air too heavy for even this street to absorb. A breeze rustled through the maple trees overhead, sending a flutter of dry leaves skittering across the driveway. They gathered around Marcus's polished shoes and then drifted on, carried away by the same wind that refused to stay still, unlike Donaldson, who was rooted to the spot by his own refusal to bend. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice low but clear, carrying just enough force to puncture the bubble of Donaldson's fragile indignation. "Mr. Donaldson," he said, using the name like a shield and a bridge at once, "the next car is at least 20 minutes out. You said yourself you're running late. Let me take you where you need to go. That's what I'm here for." Donaldson's eyes snapped up from his phone to Marcus's face for a heartbeat. Their gazes locked, one cold and resentful, the other patient, steady, and unyielding. The unspoken truth hovered between them, thick as the humid air. There was no proper car waiting around the corner. No magical alternative that could spare Donaldson the small, private humiliation of sharing a ride with the man standing before him. The cicadas thrummed louder, their song filling the pause that settled like dust around the two men. Donaldson's fingers drummed nervously against his phone case, the edge of the device digging into his palm. His mouth open, closed. He let out an exasperated breath, a thin, sharp hiss of surrender that said more than any apology would have. He didn't step forward yet, but he didn't turn away either. And for Marcus, that was enough for now, a crack in the wall, just wide enough for the truth to slip through when the time was right. Marcus didn't move when Donaldson let out a sharp, bitter laugh, more like a bark. Really at his own helplessness, the older man's fingers fumbled at his phone again, the screen glowing a faint blue in the harsh daylight, thumb jabbing, icons, contacts, numbers. His voice rose and fell in angry bursts, part threat, part plea. But on the other end, no one seemed to answer. Voicemail again, and again tinny echoes of polite, impersonal recordings bouncing back at him like a mirror he couldn't crack. Marcus shifted his weight slightly and leaned back against the car's side panel. The metal was warm from the sun, radiating a heat that sank into the thin fabric of his blazer. He folded his arms loosely, one foot crossed over the other at the ankle. He looked like a man waiting for a friend outside a cafe, not someone being publicly dismissed by the very person he was meant to serve. Over Donaldson's frantic mumbling, the cicadas droned on, undisturbed by human pride. A pair of sparrows darted from the shadow of the porch to the low branches of the maple tree overhead, wings flicking shadows across Marcus's face as he lifted his wrist to check his watch. The gesture was small but deliberate. The sleek silver hands ticked forward, indifferent to tension and insult alike. Marcus's eyes narrowed slightly, but not with annoyance. If anything, they seemed to soften, as if he were watching a child work through a tantrum, one he knew would burn itself out long before it changed anything real. He lowered his arm and let it rest over the other again, the posture calm, casual. A man with nowhere else to be but here, in this exact moment. His phone vibrated once in his jacket pocket, a muted hum that he felt more than heard. Marcus didn't flinch. He slipped his hand inside the pocket, drew the phone out, and angled it so the screen was hidden from Donaldson's restless eyes. A single notification pulsed across the top edge, Chief's office, just 2 words, and the first half of a message that the bright summer light made impossible to read from any distance. He swiped the notification away with a flick of his thumb. Whatever the message was, it didn't change the fact that he was here, now, leaning against this car, watching an older man wrestle with his own illusions about who deserved to sit where. Donaldson's pacing carved invisible lines into the driveway gravel. He checked the street like he expected another car to appear out of thin air, something bigger, shinier, driven by someone he imagined would better suit his standards. His shoes scuffed tiny clouds of dust into the air, dark spots of sweat blooming under his arms and along the spine of his pressed shirt. He lifted the phone to his ear again. "Terry, pick up, damn it." His voice cracked at the edges, the frustration now mixing with something rawer, a note of dread that he couldn't quite swallow. But Terry didn't pick up, Neither did the next name he punched into the keypad or the next. Each unanswered ring seemed to push his shoulders down. A slow collapse of the stiff posture he carried out of his front door. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying Donaldson the way a patient chess player watches an opponent rush a move he can't afford to get wrong. He glanced once more at his watch. The sun had shifted just enough that the shadows of the trees now cut halfway across the hood of the car. Time, as always, moved only forward. When Donaldson turned to pace back toward the porch again, Marcus's voice slid through the thick, muggy air low, unhurried, unforced. "Sir," he called gently, just enough to break the loop of unanswered calls and frantic pacing. "If you don't mind, you'll be late for your appointment." It was not a question. It was a lifeline, offered without pity. Donaldson froze, mid-step, as if the words hit him like a splash of cold water. He turned, his mouth working soundlessly before the words found him. "I'd rather walk," he snapped, the volume far louder than it needed to be. A pair of wind chimes tinkled from a neighbor's porch across the street, mocking the outburst with their soft, cheerful ringing. Donaldson's eyes darted down the road in endless stretch of shimmering asphalt that rippled in the heat haze, all the way to the sleepy corner where the street curved behind tall hedges and vanished. He squinted, trying to gauge the distance to wherever he thought salvation lay waiting. His throat bobbed as he swallowed the taste of his own stubbornness. Marcus let the silence settle between them, arms still folded, back still pressed against the warm metal. He didn't laugh. He didn't sigh. He didn't say, "You won't make it, or you'll ruin those nice shoes." He simply waited, eyes steady, meeting Donaldson's in the hush of the moment, and in that quiet, a single cicada buzzed loud enough to break the air. As if to mark the absurdity of it, a man in an expensive suit, willing to sweat through silk, leather and pride just to avoid 30 minutes in the backseat of a car, driven by the wrong kind of man. Donaldson's jaw tightened. His fingers clutched his phone so hard that the plastic casing creaked in his grip. The breeze shifted, lifting the corner of Marcus's blazer, revealing the sleek outline of the phone still tucked inside, the unseen message from Chief's office waiting like a secret between the folds. A bead of sweat rolled from Donaldson's temple down to the edge of his collar again, tracing the same path it had minutes before except now. It seemed to linger in his throat like an accusation. Marcus shifted just enough to stand up straight, arms uncrossing as he stepped forward to hold the door open again. The gesture was the same as before, simple, polite, unwavering. The door remained open, waiting for the choice that was never really about the car at all. And Donaldson, caught in his own reflection in the dark window of the back seat, saw something that he wasn't ready to name yet. Pride, maybe, or fear, or the cold echo of his own voice saying, "I'd rather walk into a sun that would burn the lie right off his back." Just as Donaldson opened his mouth perhaps to fire off one more retort, or maybe to spin on his heel and make good on his hollow threat to walk, a distant growl rolled across the sky. It started as a low, lazy rumble, like a tired dog shifting in his sleep, but within seconds it grew into a deep, resonant drumbeat that seemed to vibrate through the quiet street, rattling the leaves on the maples and hushing the cicadas mid-song. Donaldson paused mid-step, phone still clutched in his hand, eyes flicking upward. The sun, which only moments ago had burned so confidently overhead, was now swallowed by a fast-rolling curtain of charcoal clouds that gathered and roiled like something alive. A sudden breeze lifted, cool and sharp, slicing through the heavy warmth. The first drop landed on the back of Donaldson's hand, cold enough to make him flinch. Then came the rain, no gentle sprinkle or polite drizzle. This was a summer downpour, fierce and immediate, as if the sky had been holding its breath for hours and could no longer bear the weight. Within seconds, dry pavement turned dark, puddles blossomed in the driveway gravel, and the sound of water slapping the hood of the car filled the tense silence. With its relentless rhythm, Donaldson swore under his breath sharp, panicked words that Marcus pretended not to hear. The older man looked over his shoulder at the house, but the front door was already shut tight, the pale shape of a housekeeper blinking at him once through the narrow sidelight window, before vanishing behind drawn curtains. No rescue there. No umbrella appeared. No one stepped forward to hold his hand through this small surrender. Marcus didn't move, still holding the back door open, rain splattering his shoulders, dampening the edge of his blazer. His face remained calm, almost serene, though a single droplet clung to his temple before racing down the line of his jaw. He didn't wipe it away, Donaldson lingered on the porch for another breath, then another, as if sheer stubbornness could bend the weather back into submission, but the rain only answered with a heavier curtain, turning his neatly combed hair to slick lines that stuck to his forehead. His crisp white collar wilted under the weight of it, a slow collapse that mirrored the stubborn set of his jaw, with a grunt that was half anger, half admission of defeat. Donaldson lurched forward. He hefted his leather briefcase in both hands as though it were suddenly too heavy to carry, then tossed it into the back seat with more force than necessary. The bag landed with a muted thud against the opposite door. He glared at Marcus, eyes, narrow slits beneath dripping brows, before climbing in after it. He angled himself into the corner of the seat, back rigid against the window, arms folded tightly across his chest like a man bracing for impact. He turned his face to the glass, watching the water race down in jagged lines, refusing to look anywhere near Marcus. Marcus waited until Donaldson's coat sleeve disappeared inside the car, before he closed the door gently, careful not to let it slam. He rounded the back of the sedan, his shoes kicking up tiny splashes from the shallow puddles gathering in the gravel. He slid behind the wheel, adjusted the air vent with a small, thoughtful motion, then turned the ignition. The engine hummed to life, blending with the drumming of rain on the roof for a few seconds. The interior filled with nothing but the soft sound of the windshield wipers, sweeping rhythmically back and forth, swish thud clearing away the blurred world outside, only for it to vanish again under the next sheet of rain. Marcus glanced at the rearview mirror. Donaldson's eyes were fixed on the glass, but the older man's reflection gave him away tight lips, a vein pulsing at his temple, droplets of water clinging stubbornly to the collar of his once crisp shirt. Marcus let the silence breathe between them for a moment, then spoke, his tone so gentle it almost dissolved into the hush of the wipers. "Would you like the AC on, sir?" he asked, genuine courtesy threading through every word. Donaldson didn't answer. He shifted in his seat, the leather squeaking under him as he angled himself even farther toward the window and impossible feet given how far he already pressed into the corner. His arms stayed locked over his chest, his gaze pinned stubbornly on the rivulets of rain. If Marcus's words reached him at all, he gave no sign. Outside, the world blurred into watercolor streaks, gray and green, and the occasional smear of a passing car's headlights. The sedan eased away from the curb, tires setting up twin trails of water that fanned out behind them like the wake of a slow boat. They passed the rows of identical houses, their lawns now glistening and wild under the sudden downpour. Here and there, neighbors peered out from behind curtains, invisible eyes tracking the unlikely pair in the modest car creeping down the flooded street. Inside, the air grew cooler as Marcus turned the fan to low anyway, more for the windshield's sake than for comfort. He kept his hands steady on the wheel, fingers tapping once, then still. He didn't look at Donaldson again, but the mirror caught enough a glimpse of a man who'd chosen to sit in a corner, rather than admit the rain had humbled him. For Marcus, the road ahead was clear enough. One turn, then another. The traffic light up ahead blinked yellow through the sheets of rain, and he slowed, smooth and careful. Behind him, the thunder rumbled again, softer now, as if satisfied that it had made its point. Between the hum of the tires and the rain's insistent drumming on the roof, Marcus allowed the smallest flicker of a smile to ghost across his lips, so faint it vanished, before it ever truly formed. Not triumph, not revenge, just a quiet confirmation that some storms didn't always need to be fought. Some storms were there to wash things clean, whether the man in the back seat wanted them to or not. And so they drove on through the rain, two men separated by inches of leather and a lifetime of walls neither speaking, both forced by the weather and time to share this small, sealed world that neither could fully control. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time Marcus steered the sedan onto the main road, leaving the prim, polished neighborhood behind. Water dripped from the side mirrors in slow, deliberate beats, matching the rhythmic hush of the tires on the wet asphalt dot in the back seat. Donaldson remained, a fortress, arms still crossed, eyes locked on the street window beside him. But every few blocks, that fortress cracked just enough for his eyes to dart forward, checking the unfamiliar street signs, the unfamiliar shops, the unfamiliar people moving through the rain with hoods pulled tight and umbrellas that looked like bright flowers against the gray day. The car rolled past rows of brick storefronts where the polished symmetry of Donaldson's neighborhood gave way to mismatched awnings and handwritten signs in the windows. Marcus slowed at a corner, where a group of kids huddled beneath the overhang of a laundromat's awning, their laughter drifting through the rain like a brief, defiant burst of summer. Donaldson shifted in his seat, his discomfort obvious. His shoulders stiffened, eyes narrowed, breath catching slightly each time the car paused at a stoplight that revealed more of the world. He had spent years pretending it didn't exist. Marcus didn't say a word. His hands were steady on the wheel, his eyes flicking from the road to the rearview mirror in patient intervals. When he stopped at a crosswalk, an older woman with shopping bags nodded at him through the rain, and he nodded back, a silent, familiar exchange that Donaldson pretended not to notice. A soft chime interrupted the hush of rain, and Wheels Marcus's phone screen lit up on the dashboard. He tapped the Bluetooth button on the steering wheel, and his calm voice filled the small, tense space between them. "Hey, Denise. I'm on the road. Everything okay?" Donaldson's head snapped up at the sound of Marcus's voice echoing so casually through the car's speakers. He rolled his eyes as if the simple act of hearing Marcus speak to someone like he had a life that extended beyond the driver's seat was somehow offensive. A woman's warm, clear voice came through the speakers, cheerful but urgent. "Hi, Chief. We've got the kids at the center waiting for you. They're so excited you'll be here tonight. Ms. Loretta's prepping dinner and asked if you could bring those extra supply boxes you promised." Donaldson let out a low snort, so faint it almost drowned under the rain, but Marcus caught it. He didn't respond right away. He listened, nodding as though Denise could see him. "Got it," Marcus said. "Tell Loretta not to worry. I'll handle the boxes. I'll swing by the storage unit after this run." Donaldson muttered just loud enough for the front seat to hear. Typical. The word oozed contempt, drawn out and bitter. Like he'd bitten down on a lemon he pretended he didn't order. Marcus's eyes flicked up to the rearview mirror, just a glance, quick and neutral. But there was an edge behind his calm that only he knew how to keep hidden. He said nothing, letting the silence answer for him. Denise's voice broke the pause. "All right, Chief, drive safe. The kids can't wait to see you." The line clicked off, leaving the car steeped once more in the hush of rain and the sound of rubber tires humming over slick roads. Donaldson shifted again, this time pressing his back deeper into the seat as though trying to put more space between himself and Marcus's quiet revelations. He cleared his throat, but no apology came, just a heavy exhale through flared nostrils. The landscape outside the window changed block by block. Neat hedges and high gates gave way to wide sidewalks lined with corner stores, small churches, basketball courts behind chain-link fences glistening with rain. The sedan glided through it all like an outsider that belonged more than it seemed to. Donaldson leaned forward suddenly, voice sharp. "Where are you taking me?" The question was more accusation than curiosity. His eyes darted to the unfamiliar street names again, his knuckles whitening against the armrest. Marcus didn't flinch. His hands stayed steady at 10 and 2. "A shortcut, sir," he replied evenly, his tone calm, almost gentle like a teacher, explaining something to a child who refused to listen. "Trust me, the expressway is blocked with construction. This will get us downtown faster." Donaldson scoffed, sinking back again as if Marcus's reassurance were an insult in itself. His gaze drifted back to the window, where rain droplets traced erratic paths down the glass. A few blocks later, the shortcut carried them past a stretch of red brick wall that ran the length of an abandoned lot. On it, vibrant colors bloomed. In the rain, a mural, larger than life, depicting black leaders whose faces watched the passing cars with a quiet, painted dignity. Marcus's eyes caught on it. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly. A subtle lift of his chin as his gaze lingered on the familiar figures. There was Malcolm, Angela, Martin, faces both hardened and kind, framed by splashes of gold and cobalt, blue that refused to fade, no matter how many storms battered the brick's dot in the back seat. Donaldson's eyes flicked to the mural, then back to Marcus's reflection in the mirror. He let out another scoff, a short, ugly laugh that didn't quite have the courage to be a word. He turned away sharply, pressing his temple to the glass, as if the sight of history written so boldly on a rain-soaked wall was more than he could stand to hold in his gaze. The car rolled on, deeper into the shortcut Marcus knew by heart. Outside, the mural blurred in the distance, its painted eyes still watching, long after the man in the back seat had turned his away. The car rolled through the last stretch of the shortcut, the rain easing into a fine mist that clung to the windshield like a thin veil. The sky, still heavy with clouds, allowed thin shafts of watery sunlight to break through here and there, catching on wet pavement and turning puddles into pools of soft, shifting silver. Inside the car, Donaldson's silence had hardened into something dense and brittle, like a glass vase balanced too close to an edge. His gaze had stopped darting out the window. Now, he simply stared straight ahead at the back of Marcus's seat, jaw set so tightly that a muscle in his cheek jumped with each passing mile. Marcus drove with the same quiet precision that had carried him through the suburban streets, the hidden mural, and the tense hush of Donaldson's barely contained disdain. His hands stayed steady, his eyes flicking now and then to the rearview mirror more out of habit than curiosity. The city blocks shifted around them, neat rows of brick houses, giving way to a broader avenue lined with local shops, a public library, a small park where wet swings swayed lazily in the breeze. Then, without warning, Marcus flicked the turn signal and eased the car off the main avenue. Donaldson's head snapped up at the click of the indicator, his eyes narrowing as they rolled slowly to a stop in front of a modest but dignified red brick building. String lights were strung under the awning, twinkling softly in the dull light. A wide vinyl banner stretched across the entrance. Rain-speckled, but easy to read, annual community fundraiser. All are welcome. Donaldson leaned forward, squinting at the sign through the misted glass. His voice came out in a bark that startled even him. What the hell is this? I have a meeting downtown. I don't have time for this nonsense. Marcus didn't turn immediately. He put the car in park and let the engine idle with a low, steady purr. Then he shifted in his seat, half turned so he could see Donaldson clearly. For the first time since the ride began, Marcus looked directly into Donaldson's eyes, steady, unflinching, no hint of mockery in the calm that anchored his expression. You will, Marcus said evenly, voice so gentle it was almost disarming. You'll get to your meeting. But first, there's someone here who's been waiting for you. Donaldson's eyes flared, a flush creeping up his neck. He let out a sharp laugh that dissolved into a sputter of disbelief. Waiting for me? What are you talking about? You think you can just... He gestured at the banner with a shaky hand, his tone dripping with contempt he couldn't quite mask under forced bravado. Drag me to whatever this is. Marcus didn't answer right away. He held Donaldson's gaze for one heartbeat more, then turned away with the same quiet deliberation that had defined every move since he first opened the car door that morning. He stepped out into the drizzle, the door closing behind him with a soft, final click that somehow carried more weight than any slammed door could have. Through the fog glass, Donaldson watched him circle the back of the car. Part of him, some stubborn root of pride, wanted to lunge forward, lock the door, shout through the window that he wouldn't budge. But something in Marcus's calm, something that had hovered at the edges of this entire ride, made that impossible. A moment later, the back door swung open, letting the fresh damp air wash through the leather interior. Marcus stood there again, same posture, same patient courtesy, rain missing his shoulders and beating in his short hair. Mr. Donaldson, Marcus said, low but clear, if you'd step out, please. Donaldson stared at the open door, at Marcus's steady hand holding it, at the drizzle that danced in the shallow puddles along the curb. He looked beyond Marcus's shoulder, where warm light glowed from inside the building. Through the wide glass doors, he could just make out people moving, about laughing, carrying platters of food, pinning name tags to jackets. It was not the polished boardroom he was used to, nor the sleek tower where he'd spent decades building a reputation with doors that only opened for the right kind of people. It was something else, something that made his chest tighten with a feeling he couldn't quite name. His mouth open, ready with another sharp refusal, but nothing came out. His fingers drummed once on the seat beside him. He could feel the dampness still clinging to his collar where the rain had soaked through earlier, a chill reminder of the surrender the storm had already wrung from him. Slowly, stiffly, Donaldson shifted forward, his leather briefcase bumping against his knee. He paused at the threshold of the open door, his eyes darting once more to Marcus's face, searching for some sign of a trick, a trap, anything he could use to push back and slam the door shut. But Marcus just waited. No smirk, no triumph in his eyes, just that same unbending patience that had carried them from the manicured lawns to this rain-speckled sidewalk in front of a building he'd never have chosen for himself. Donaldson let out a breath that seemed to deflate something in him. With a small grunt, he swung his legs out of the car and planted his polished shoes on the wet curb. The drizzle found him immediately, dampening the top of his neatly combed hair. He did not shrink back. He did not bolt for the car. He stood, one hand still clutching his briefcase, glaring not at Marcus this time, but at the warm light spilling from the fundraiser doors. "What is this, really?" he muttered, voice rough around the edges. Marcus didn't answer directly. He simply gestured toward the entrance with a small, respectful nod as if to say, "Go see for yourself." Behind them, the car engine ticked softly as it cooled in the damp air. Ahead, the community's laughter and warm conversation drifted through the open doorway, reaching out like a hand to pull Donaldson forward into something he could neither predict nor fully control. For the first time that day, Donaldson hesitated, not out of contempt, but out of the unfamiliar weight of his own uncertainty. Donaldson followed Marcus up the short flight of damp steps, shoes slipping slightly on the wet concrete as the drizzle softened to a misty haze. Warm air, spiced with the smell of baked casseroles and brewed coffee, spilled out the moment Marcus pushed open the wide glass door. The faint hum of rain behind them was replaced by the lively hum of voices, laughter, greetings, the clatter of dishes being cleared for the evening's event. For a heartbeat, Donaldson hovered just inside the threshold, letting the warmth wash over him while his eyes adjusted. The place was simple, but cared for. Polished floors, faded community bulletin boards crowded with photos of block parties and youth sports teams. Long tables lined the hall, covered in modest white cloths and dotted with trays of homemade pies and steaming pans of cornbread. Balloons in blue and gold sagged slightly from the humidity, tied to chairs where children sat kicking their feet and giggling at each other's name tags. And then he heard it like a ripple through the crowd that spread too quickly for him to ignore. "Chief Marcus," someone called, voice bright and affectionate. Donaldson's eyes snapped toward the source, a middle-aged woman with salt and pepper hair and a pink cardigan, hurrying over with a Tupperware clutched in her arms. She wrapped Marcus in a quick hug, careful not to crush whatever was inside the container, then pulled back to beam at him. "You made it. I told them you wouldn't miss it, rain or not," she said, wagging a playful finger at him. "We kept your place up front." Marcus smiled an open, genuine smile so at odds with the quiet calm he'd carried in the car. "Couldn't miss Loretta's peach cobbler. Now could I, Ms. Ruth," he teased, his voice warm, drawing a few knowing chuckles from the others. Gathered near, Donaldson felt something tighten in his chest, an invisible knot pulling at his ribs as he looked from Marcus to the people around him. A few more turned at the sound of Chief Marcus, and the name spread, carried on laughter and surprise and open affection. A young boy no older than 10 broke away from a table near the front. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floor as he bolted toward Marcus, arms outstretched. Coach Marcus, you made it," he shouted, nearly colliding with Marcus's legs as he threw himself into a hug. Marcus bent down, ruffling the boy's damp hair, not minding the water droplets that spotted his suit. "Hey, big man," he said softly, voice low so only the boy could hear. "You holding down the fort for me?" The boy nodded fiercely. "I told Jamal you were coming. He said you'd be too busy, but I said nope," he said, stubborn pride puffing up his tiny chest. "Well, you were right. You're always right." Marcus tapped the boy's nose gently, earning a grin before the child scampered off, yelling the news that Coach Marcus had arrived to anyone who listened. Donaldson stood frozen in the entryway, his hands still wrapped stiffly around the handle of his briefcase. His mind stumbled over itself, replaying every word he'd hissed into the back seat of that car, every dismissive wave, every muttered slur. The memory of it pressed against the warmth of this room like a stone in his shoe. A sudden flash pulled him from the spiral click. A young woman with a press badge around her neck snapped another photo, the camera's light briefly reflecting off the rows of framed awards along the back wall. Her grin was easy and familiar as she nudged Marcus's elbow. "Chief, do you mind a quick statement for the Gazette? We're doing a feature on the fundraiser turnout biggest we've had in 5 years. They say, looks like you're the man of the hour," she said. Marcus gave her the same patient nod he'd given Donaldson when he'd offered the car door. "Happy to, Mia, but let's get everyone fed first," he said, his tone so natural, so at home. It carved a fresh hollow in Donaldson's chest. Before Donaldson could fully process it, another voice broke in a crisp, official tone he recognized well. Mr. Donaldson." The city official, tall, broad-shouldered, with a lapel pin bearing the mayor's seal, extended a hand. Donaldson took it automatically, though his fingers felt numb. "Glad you made it through the rain. You're here for the donation signing, right?" Very good, very good. The official turned smoothly to Marcus, clapping him lightly on the back. And I see you've already met our man of the evening, Chief Marcus Johnson, head of the Community Uplift Initiative. I believe you two were supposed to have a sit-down before your next contract's approved, yes? Donaldson's mouth opened, but no words came out. The name Chief Marcus Johnson rang in his ears like a dropped bell. The man he belittled as just another driver, the man he brushed off with slurs and suspicion, chief, coach, leader, the person he'd come to see for the check that would put his company's name on the plaque out front. The polite smile he reserved for boardrooms wouldn't form. Instead, Donaldson's jaw slackened slightly, a crack in the stony mask he'd worn so carefully for decades. Marcus really looked at him this time and saw not the driver who politely opened the car door, but the quiet storm behind the calm. The man who'd built this place, filled it with laughter, warm food, and second chances, exactly the sort of community Donaldson's world had taught him to avoid, to dismiss, to pretend did not matter, and now he was standing in it, stripped of his umbrella, his excuses, and the fragile armor of his own authority. Marcus met his gaze with that same quiet patience, no triumph in his eyes, just the simple truth, laid bare for all to see. Donaldson's mouth opened and closed like he'd forgotten how to form words. Around him, the warmth and hum of the fundraiser pressed closer, but it might as well have been miles away. He felt the wet collar of his shirt clinging to the back of his neck, the faint prickle of sweat mixing with the lingering dampness from the rain outside. He gripped the handle of his briefcase so hard his knuckles whitened, the polished leather squeaking under his clenched fingers. His mind scrambled for the scripts he knew so well: boardroom pleasantries, practice laughs, the easy charm he wielded like a blade when it suited him, but none of it fit here. None of it could shield him from the reality standing inches away. In the calm, unbothered posture of Marcus Johnson, Marcus, who had opened the door for him, waited patiently in the rain, driven him through streets he'd long pretended didn't exist, streets he'd funded studies about, from behind polished glass conference tables, but had never really seen until today. Marcus, who had let him stew in the back seat with his muttered slurs and rigid silence, never flinching, never lowering himself to the level of the man who now stood trembling in front of him. Donaldson's throat constricted as if the words he needed had barbed hooks. He tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped so small he wondered if Marcus had even heard it. The chatter behind them blurred into a hush as nearby guests noticed the shift in the air. Someone lowered the volume on a portable speaker. A child's laughter stopped mid-giggle. The hush grew, rippling outward like a dropped stone in a pond. Donaldson forced a breath through the knot in his chest. He lifted his eyes to meet Marcus's, those patient, watchful eyes, and felt something deep in his chest crack like ice underfoot. He began, his voice brittle, teetering at the edge of breaking. He cleared his throat, tried again. I didn't know. A hot sting pricked at the corners of his eyes. He could feel the damp heat of tears pooling where they hadn't been welcomed for decades. Tears he'd learned to swallow back when deals went bad, when opponents threatened lawsuits, when he buried mistakes under contracts and polished press statements. But here, under the soft string lights and warm laughter of people who were no longer laughing, the tears refused to stay buried. His shoulders slumped as though someone had cut the strings holding him upright. He fumbled for his handkerchief, but found only the slick handle of his briefcase, still gripped like a lifeline. A shuddering breath escaped him, half sob, half confession. His lips trembled. I didn't know who you were, he whispered, the words splintering at the edges. I didn't know. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. The tears slipped down his lined cheeks, warm and humiliating. He could feel the room watching, the invisible circle of eyes pressing in, some sympathetic, some simply witnessing what needed to be seen. Marcus stood motionless. He hadn't stepped back. He hadn't stepped forward either. His steady gaze didn't soften into pity, nor did it sharpen with anger. He simply was a solid presence in a moment that laid every mask bare. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice carried the same calm that had waited at the curb, driven through the storm, and opened this door not once, but twice. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them with respect, Marcus said, his words quiet, but so clear they filled the hall like a small, steady drumbeat. A hush deeper than silence followed. The crowd, children, parents, volunteers, the city official who tried to smooth it all over, watched with a solemn attention that made Donaldson's ears ring. The only sounds were the gentle squeak of a serving cart rolling to a stop and the soft flutter of the banner above the door as the air conditioner kicked on. Donaldson's face crumpled fully now, the last of his practiced composure collapsing with the tears that blurred his vision. He felt his knees threaten to buckle, but pride, what scraps were left of it, held him standing. Not pride in himself, but something rawer, the stubborn, trembling knowledge that if he fell now, he'd never stand again in any way that mattered. He fumbled for words that might make it better, but none came. No apology could repaint the moments they both knew could not be undone words. Spat like poison in a driveway, eyes that refused to see the man behind the wheel, and so he stood there, instead humiliated, exposed, smaller than he had ever felt in any polished boardroom or mahogany-walled conference suite. He stood before the man he had tried so hard to shrink, now towering in quiet, unspoken dignity. Marcus did not move to comfort him. He did not offer the easy out of a forgiving smile or a soft pat on the back to save Donaldson from himself. Instead, he let the moment breathe, let it settle like a weight Donaldson would carry long after the tears dried dot around them. The people who called Marcus chief, coach, brother, watched in a hush that felt holy in its honesty. There was no applause for this unraveling, no handshake to tidy the shame away, just the truth, bare and undeniable, that respect was never meant to be earned by title alone. In that silence, something shifted, not just in Donaldson's chest, but in the space between them all. A reminder, simple and searing, that what we believe we know of people is often only what our walls allow us to see, and that sometimes a man must stand in his own ruin before he can ever claim to build something better. The hush that had settled over the hall lingered as Donaldson's tears dried on his flushed cheeks. The warmth of the room returned in quiet waves, small conversations starting again at the edges. The shuffle of children's sneakers against the scuffed floor, the clink of serving spoons in casserole dishes. But at the center of it all, a fragile hush held fast around Marcus and the man who had walked in believing he knew exactly who he was. A small hand tugged at Marcus's sleeve. He looked down to see the young boy from earlier in his big eyes darting nervously from Marcus to Donaldson. He held onto Marcus's cuff with a grip that said he needed an answer for something too big to carry alone. Coach Marcus, Yelena whispered, glancing at Donaldson's trembling shoulders. Why is he crying? Did he get in trouble? The question hovered in the warm air like a gentle echo, catching the ears of other children standing nearby. A few more little heads poked out from behind parents' legs, wide eyes trained on Marcus, waiting for something they didn't have the words to ask. Marcus lowered himself to one knee, meeting Yelena's eyes at their honest, curious height. He laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady and light, as he spoke not just to Yelena, but to every small ear now straining to understand what they'd just witnessed. Sometimes, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the hall without needing to rise. People will judge you before they know you. They'll see your skin, or where you live, or what you wear, and they'll think they know your worth. He paused, glancing up at the circle of young faces, some nodding because they'd heard the lesson before, in whispers at home, others frowning in fresh confusion. Donaldson, shoulders still hunched, lifted his eyes to listen, too forced to hear what he'd become an example of. But listen to me, Marcus continued, his hand warm on Yelena's shoulder. Their hate can be loud, their words can sting, but your actions, what you do, will always speak louder than their hate ever can. He let the words rest in the quiet for a moment. The children, blinking wide eyes, took it in with a deep, unguarded seriousness only kids can carry. One girl in the back, clutching a paper plate piled high with cornbread, whispered something to her little brother. He nodded solemnly, holding tighter to her free hand. Always remember who you are, Marcus finished, giving Yelena's shoulder a gentle squeeze before rising to his feet again. No one gets to tell you who you can't be. Behind him, Donaldson's eyes shone wet once more, this time not from the raw shame alone, but from the sharp, aching clarity that comes when truth slices clean through pride. His breath stuttered out in small, shaky bursts as the city official gently placed a clipboard in his hands, a fat check tucked beneath it, the one he planned to sign with a smile and a speech he could deliver in his sleep. There was no speech now, no bright grin for the camera. His signature scratched across the bottom of the check in awkward, halting lines. He paused, the pen hovering as if it weighed too much. When he lifted his head, he didn't look at the official, he looked at Marcus. I should have seen you, Donaldson whispered, voice rough with remorse. I should have. From the start. Marcus didn't nod. He didn't dismiss it with and easy it's all right. He simply accepted the words for what they were, a broken bridge beginning to be rebuilt. Plank by plank, whether Donaldson's pride liked it or not. The children nearby watched the check being handed over, wide-eyed, at the zeros they didn't fully understand, but knowing somehow that something important had shifted here tonight. The community center's roof would be patched, the after-school program secured for another year. The mural on the corner kept fresh with bright paint the kids would help brush on themselves. When the official clapped Donaldson's back with a politician's practice cheer, Donaldson flinched like the gesture no longer fit the man he was leaving behind in this room. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The sky had split open in places to reveal a soft, bruised blue above the rooftops. Threaded with pale evening light, Marcus held the car door open again, just as he had at the beginning. But this time, when Donaldson stepped toward it, he paused. There was no snapping of fingers, no barked complaints, no half-muttered slur hidden behind a forced smile. Just a quiet, weary nod, a silent thank you, or maybe an apology that would take a lifetime to say fully. The door shut with a gentle click as Donaldson settled into the back seat. But he didn't angle himself away, didn't hunch into the far corner like before. Instead, he sat squarely behind Marcus, briefcase at his feet, hands folded loosely in his lap. His eyes drifted to the window as the community center faded behind, them string lights blinking gently in the dusk. Marcus eased the car back onto the road, his hands calm on the wheel. Neither man spoke at first. The only sound was the quiet hum of the tires over damp pavement, carrying them from the warmth of the hall toward the sterile steel and glass towers that had once seemed so far from this neighborhood. Halfway down the avenue, Donaldson's reflection in the window caught the mural again, those painted faces, bold and unbowed. This time, he didn't look away. He let the colors blur by in the glass, imprinting themselves in corners of his mind that might never fully close again. When Marcus spoke at last, it was only to ask, gently, "Is the temperature comfortable for you, sir?" Donaldson met his eyes in the rearview mirror. For the first time, he didn't flinch from the calm waiting there. His nod was small, but sure. "It's fine. Thank you, Marcus." And for the rest of that quiet ride back to the polished downtown lobby where his carefully curated world waited, Donaldson sat in silence. Not the cold, defensive silence of before, but something softer, something broken open, raw and honest. Watching the city pass by through new eyes he'd have to learn how to use all over again. The car rolled away from the curb in a hush of damp tires on glistening asphalt. Behind it, the community center stood framed in the soft gold of an evening sun that had finally broken free of the clouds. The battered banner above the entrance fluttered gently in the clearing breeze. Annual community fundraiser. All are welcome, its edges still damp with the day's rain, but gleaming where the light caught them. Through the rear window, Donaldson watched it shrink, the bright silhouettes of the children clustered near the door lingering like little lanterns of memory. Some of the kids had spilled out onto the steps, ignoring the soft scolding of a volunteer, hurrying them back inside. They waved with small hands and big voices, their laughter rising like sparrows taking flight. "By Coach Marcus," one of them shouted, arms flapping in oversized sleeves. Another, smaller boy, cupped his hands around his mouth to call out, "Thank you for the snacks." A girl, hair in neat braids tied with yellow beads, just pressed her palms together in a shy goodbye before darting back through the open door. Inside the car, Donaldson's reflection trembled faintly in the side window. He watched the waving children until they blurred, until the rising sun caught on the moisture in his eyes and turned it to shimmering flecks of gold. He did not bother to wipe them away this time. In the driver's seat, Marcus said nothing. He simply drove, his posture easy, one hand on the wheel, eyes soft but clear as the avenue carried them away from the patchwork streets he knew by heart. Each passing block wore the fresh sheen of rain rinsed clean, the murals and corner shops and narrow alleys catching the sunlight in quiet celebration. For a few long moments, the only sound inside the car was the rhythmic whisper of the road. Beneath them, Donaldson shifted in his seat once, twice, his briefcase untouched at his feet. His shoulders had lost their stiff edge. They sagged now, the burden of his own smallness pressing him down in a way that, strangely, didn't feel like defeat, more like a lesson that might grow into something larger if he let it die at a red light. Marcus glanced into the rearview mirror. Their eyes met not the forced, uneasy collisions from before, but something more human, stripped of pretense. A look that held neither bitterness nor easy forgiveness, only a quiet truth shared. between two men who had once occupied the same city but never the same world. You run this whole thing by yourself? Donaldson asked suddenly, his voice raw, as though it hadn't yet caught up to this new softness. It wasn't an accusation, just the fragile shape of curiosity trying to grow where old walls had stood. Marcus's lips lifted at one corner, a tired but genuine smile. No one does anything worth doing alone, he said, eyes flicking back to the road as the light turned green. I just hold the door open. They're the ones who walk through. Donaldson sat with that, turning it over in his mind like a stone he'd found in the street and pocketed for later. He looked away again, letting the buildings roll by. His mind drifted to the check he'd signed, how small his signature had felt compared to the laughter of children he didn't know, the murals he'd never really seen, the warmth that had cracked him open in a way no boardroom ever could dot outside. The clouds parted fully now, sunlight spilling onto wet roofs, catching in puddles and painting the street with quicksilver reflections. It turned the mural on the corner into a living flame of colored blues and golds, and reds shimmering on the brick like fresh paint. Back at the community center, the kids who had lingered on the steps drifted inside one by one, shepherded by parents and neighbors. The last to leave was Yelen, the small boy who'd hugged Marcus so fiercely when he arrived. He paused at the top step, squinting at the distant taillights until they turned the corner and disappeared. Then, with a grin too wide for his face, Yelen raised a hand and waved at the vanishing car, at the man who always came back no matter how far he drove away, at the world that for one shining moment had felt like it could be something softer, braver, better. Inside the car, Donaldson's hand drifted to the seat beside him, fingers brushing the smooth leather. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, but the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned, like the hush of a church after the last hymn has been sung. When everyone stands in the same quiet, hearts turn in the same direction, even if no one speaks it out loud. Marcus turned onto the main boulevard that would lead them to the glass towers Donaldson called home. Those neat corridors of contracts and press statements, bright lobby lights that never flickered no matter how the weather changed. But the world beyond that glass looked different now, and Donaldson knew, however faintly, that he would carry tonight's truth with him. Through those polished doors, the sedan glided through the late sun, casting twin shadows on the street. Behind it, the city, wet and bright and humming with second chances, opened wide before them. And as the final block slipped away, the image lingered, children waving goodbye to a simple car rolling into the light, proof that kindness and quiet dignity could silence prejudice in ways that pride and power never could.